Well, guys, today's April 3rd, and as you know, April has started. But first off, it's Autism Awareness Month, and if you send some awareness to people with autism, I thank you for it. A couple of my friends have already done it for me, especially my fiance, who I love to death. But as of right now, got a severe weather event going on in the Ohio River Valley, along the Ohio River. Tornado watch has been issued. Was on the computer basically all the way through 1 a.m. last night, keeping track of some dangerous supercells as they went through the Joplin area. Luckily, there were no touchdowns, just a funnel cloud over the airport. But today, April 3rd, 41 years ago, I would say it's a tie, probably the biggest, and it's really the most violent tornado outbreak in U.S. history. 41 years ago, April 3rd, 1974, we had the outbreak of basically all outbreaks at the time that would change the way we look at weather forever, especially severe weather. Now, as I'll put in a video towards the end of the month, what happened 41 years ago was staggering. A huge, a violent tornado outbreak known as the Super Outbreak of 1974 broke out across 13 states from Canada all the way to the Gulf Coast. It was following a La Nina event, which means cold water off the coast of Peru. The ocean current, of course, that will give warm water in the Gulf. And when that warm, moist air from the Gulf, it was saturated, wet, and moist, which means something was brewing in the days to come. But getting back to the event, in the course of just 24 hours, a staggering 148 tornadoes tore through 13 states and the province of Ontario, Canada. Now you're probably thinking, oh wow, nearly 150 tornadoes striking in an area, in a staggering area. Some of them had to be violent. Yes, some were violent. Out of the 148 of them, 30 were ranked violent, F4 or F5. 30 of them. 1 out of every 5 tornadoes was ranked violent. 23 F4s and 7 F5 tornadoes tore, along with the other 118 tornadoes, tore a path of destruction totaling 2,500 miles. In the aftermath of the outbreak, 315 people were killed, over 5,500 people were injured. Damage at the time was in excess of $600 million, or today it would probably be around $3 to $5 billion, maybe even more. But for this video, I'm basically going to be talking about the hardest hit areas. Now, all the F5s happened within a span of just a few hours. I'm going to start westward into Indiana. The states that were hit hardest were Ohio, Kentucky, and Alabama. But the longest duration tornado was a F4 that went through Monticello, Indiana. It was on the ground for 110 miles, and it just seemed to keep going and going and going. It turned out it was a family of 9 tornadoes, but one that did go 110 miles. Dr. Greg Forbes, my idol, and Professor Dr. Ted Fujita, the great Dr. Ted Fujita, who came up with the Fujita scale, he used it as a springboard. After the outbreaks, they photographed They flew over all the tornado tracks of where they hit and came up with the map. And it turns out there were 30 supercell tornado families that produced these violent rotating storms. And it took Fujita about another year to figure out another anomaly that happened in the outbreak, known as a downburst. It is a sudden, sort of like it's, layman's terms, it's an air bomb. It's when cold, dry air gets pushed out of the thunderstorm at an accelerated pace on the backside of the storm, and with such force it could basically cause the same damage as a tornado. And it's been known to be an involvement with a lot of airplane crashes. Fujita discovered it after a infamous plane crash at Kennedy Airport in 1975. I forget which flight it was, but the main activity of these F4 and F5 tornadoes was concentrated in a corridor between the Gulf of Mexico and Lake Erie, right along that particular area. Now, the ingredients that caused this outbreak was a classic setup. But you're probably thinking, okay, classic setup, you're going to get a tornado outbreak, but what caused it to get this severe? The parameters were off the charts. Everything was off the charts. Humidity was extremely high, the dew points were extremely high, the instability was just through the roof. The CAPE values, convective available potential energy, were very, very light. It would not take much for the warm air to bust through that, causing explosive thunderstorm development. You had a cold front, warm front, low pressure, really extreme moist air from the La Nina event went up. You got really cold, dry air coming in from the Rockies. Those collide, you've got an unstable air mass. Plus, with all the low-level jets, wind shear was extremely high, and that was basically the trigger, was high. As soon as the cap was busted, boom, explosive thunderstorm development. And these were no ordinary supercells. They reached cloud tops of 65,000 feet, as high as that. A normal supercell thunderstorm that produces the most violent tornado is probably average of 40 to 45,000 feet. But the higher the cloud top of a supercell, the more capable it is of producing a violent tornado or tornado family. Now I'm going to get into starting with the F5s. I already mentioned the Monticello F4. The first F5 that happened was in southeastern Indiana. It was the only F5 to exceed a mile in width. It struck the areas of DePaul, Madison, Borden, Indiana, Henryville, Indiana, and hit Daisy Hill, Indiana. It basically followed the same exact path as the Henryville, Indiana EF4 that I mentioned in the 2012 Ohio Valley outbreak a couple of weeks ago. They reported it was a wedge tornado with no visible condensation funnel. There's really not much I could say about that tornado because it was really not studied at all. So it was the least known of the 7 F5s. Now a little bit further to the south, Brandenburg, Kentucky, a little little town on the Ohio River on the border of Kentucky and Indiana. Everything's going on as usual, it's been raining, there's been storms going on. Then somebody described smoke There was stuff coming up over the hills, black cloud comes up over the hill and hit, and that was it. What they didn't know was that an F5 tornado that had touched down about 10 miles out and had caused F3 damage in a neighboring town just came up over a hill, and without any warning, within 30 seconds, Brandenburg was reduced to absolutely nothing. The tornado, which was about half a mile to 3/4 of a mile wide, reduced houses to completely vacated basements, and there were a couple of houses in which the concrete basement wall was actually knocked inward. That takes a lot of force. The shrubbery was completely debarked, trees were snapped at the base, power lines, houses completely down. There was no warning whatsoever, and you got to remember, this was 1974. We didn't have the type of technology we have today. In those 30 seconds, 31 people were killed. No weather wire. Now, just up the road was Louisville, Kentucky. The National Weather Service in Louisville, they had no idea. They had forecasted the severe weather, but you could not see the tornadoes on radar the way you can today. The only thing that they were using radar that they had used in the military to identify aircraft, and could only pick up like only solid objects, but it could pick up raindrops, and they were checking out these green specks. Well, after that tornado hit the city, which is 45 miles away, they received word that a tornado had gone through Brandenburg, and they realized a green spot that they were looking at on that radar was producing severe weather. And they realized that that particular green dot was heading for Louisville, so they immediately put out a warning, and sure enough, about 45 minutes later, a tornado close to a mile wide wound up touching down in Louisville, hit the fairgrounds, and it was on the ground for about 20 minutes. It didn't have a long damage path, and luckily, thanks to that, only 3 people were killed. And I know you guys have seen, footage of the Oklahoma City news helicopters in the sky during during an outbreak. Louisville had a traffic reporter, Dick Gilbert, in a helicopter, and he tracked the whole tornado, where it was going, where it was hitting, and where it was heading. He was credited with saving several lives. The same supercell that produced the F5 in Brandenburg wound up producing the F4 in Louisville. It's just up the river, Cincinnati. You don't know, great, another metro area. Well, let's put it at this. They were watching a supercell thunderstorm in Indiana. The weather service is at the airport. And, weather wire was received. They had been getting, reports in all day of tornadoes going through Indiana, heading for the Ohio River and towards the tri-state area of Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. And what happened was they knew that a tornado had touched down, sounded the sirens. Louisville lost 4 people. Cincinnati only lost 3. A tornado touched down in Indiana just to the west of the Ohio River. Then it crossed into Kentucky, grazed the airport, But when it crossed into Ohio, you're thinking, oh no, it slammed Cincinnati head on. No, it didn't. It went up the west side of Cincinnati and completely annihilated Sailor Park, Ohio, and Hamilton County, Ohio. The tornado itself was really not that large. I mean, yeah, it was large in some areas, but when it really did its F5 damage, it was somewhat very, very narrow, almost kind of like your typical cone tornado. It took a restaurant barge and flipped it over. Now, obviously, they're cleaning up after that. So the storm front continues to march east. Now we get to basically the tornado that made the outbreak infamous. Xenia, Ohio. It's a town located 12 miles east of Dayton. It's situated about halfway in between Cincinnati and Columbus. It's located in southwest Ohio. It's a town in the population of 25 to 50,000, like Easton. And next thing you know, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, they got radar. There is a meteorologist in Dayton, Ohio. He saw something. He had the old military radar, and this one was actually very high resolution out of all of them. He saw a hook in the shape of a number 6. That means, something's gonna happen. It was heading straight for the city of Xenia. Sure enough, there was a tornado on the ground there. So right now, we had just had 3 F5s slam Brandenburg, Kentucky, DePaul, Indiana, and Cincinnati, Ohio. Sure enough, an F5 tornado had just touched down and was heading straight beeline for Xenia. X marks the spot. Xenia, Xenia. So, now this was the kind of radar that you would have to track the storm by hand. You'd have to go back 15 minutes, and you'd have to use a greased pencil. And believe me, meteorologists were getting fed up now with these radars. They were taking one meteorologist was so fed up that, he was taking he took a greased pencil and slammed it down on the desk, and, he was angry. He was going, we're not doing a damn bit of good. I mean, these guys were putting out warnings and people were still getting killed. The state of Indiana was put under a blanket tornado warning, the whole state. Now in Xenia, a 16-year-old high school student named Bruce Boyd was intrigued by what he was seeing coming towards his subdivision, the Arrowhead subdivision just southwest of town. He noticed that he saw these dancing funnels from the wall cloud. There were about 2-3 funnels, and they were dancing around. And this particular video helped confirm and basically debunk a theory that tornadoes contained multiple vortices, those little eddies that form, that go around, and those are actually the most violent because they have their own low pressure, their own updrafts, and since they go quicker, that's why you see one house get destroyed and the next one doesn't get hit. Well, he's filming it. They're starting to dance around. Now it's starting to get its act together. Next thing you know, this debris cloud that looks like a cereal bowl it erupts, and you see these little dusty spikes that just literally rotating, some even eclipsing themselves. Next thing you know, it's heading for Xenia. It completely leveled and swept cleanly houses away in those subdivisions, and it when it was all over, it took 10 minutes for the tornado to go through Xenia. It went straight through downtown and basically did somewhat F4 damage there, but the majority of the damage was F5. There were entire subdivisions of brick houses that had been reduced to nothing. The bricks had been deposited everywhere you could think of. Houses, there was nothing left. There were slabs. The high school had the entire second floor sheared off. It took a 2-story high school and turned it into a 1-story. The tornado exited Xenia and dissipated near the Wilberforce area, and that supercell was basically done because afterwards it produced a brief F2 in the Columbus area. In the aftermath of the F5 tornado, 34 people were killed. It was the deadliest tornado of the outbreak, and once again, this town had no tornado sirens. Brandenburg didn't have them, neither did Xenia. So as they're cleaning up, night is starting to fall. Everything is starting to weaken in Ohio. Indiana and Ohio are out of the woods. Now the area that's focused is the eastern half of Kentucky, Tennessee from the Nashville area eastward, extreme eastern Mississippi, and the entire 1/3 of the state of Alabama. Night falls. The activity shifts south towards the Dixie Alley. Now this is where some of the most violent activity happened. These areas were not prepared for a tornado strike. They only had at luck maybe just one radio or 2 radios. They had poor communication. It was either with the police or with the government. It was really not for Skywarn for sending out alerts. And add insult to injury, these areas didn't have tornado sirens either. So the sun is set, it's nighttime. The tiny town of Tanner, located in Limestone County, which is about within 30 miles of Huntsville. And you're going, oh no, another metro area is going to get hit? A group of supercell thunderstorms had popped up along the Mississippi-Alabama state line. First supercell crosses into the state. And there's another one to the south of it. This supercell dropped a tornado at about 7:05 p.m. It's starting to tear through the countryside. It's destroying houses. Then it crosses the Tennessee River, just missing the Browns Ferry nuclear power plant, which was basically close to, at the time, was having safety violation issues. As soon as it entered, just past it as a large water spout came back on land, that's when it got violent. This tornado slammed Tanner head on. Every house that it hit, there was nothing left but a slab. 2 truss towers from the Browns Ferry nuclear plant, the TVA lines, those big truss towers that you see, 2 of them were ripped from their anchors. One of them was crunched up in a ball of steel and thrown. The other one was never found. The tornado reached about a mile wide, and then it shrunk, hit the town of Tanner, and killed 28 people. And then just like that, all of a sudden it hits Capshaw, which is a neighboring town, and then lifts just like that. Goes into Tennessee and then starts doing its business there, producing several F4s. Another supercell, a third supercell to the south, produced a long track F4 tornado that slammed through Jasper at about 8:30 p.m. And you could tell by that because there was a phenomenon that they discovered during the outbreak in which when a tornado hit, all the clocks would stop. There were stopped clocks that were stopped at the time in which the tornado actually struck. There was a courthouse in Jasper that was damaged by the tornado, and the clock stopped. Part of it was probably because of the electrical grid going out. Well, there's been, clocks on the wall like that only run on batteries. Well, of course, take away the battery power. Things like that. The houses that the first tornado hit were completely gone. There were pieces, there was a washing machine that had its drum completely knocked off its axis, sort of jolted, and the agitator was thrown out of it. The drum was crooked, and they said one house was gone and then a couple of other houses completely gone. They couldn't find anybody. They couldn't tell if anybody was home or not. They said the largest pieces of debris that they found were bed springs. The first tornado completely lifted a well pump out of the ground and threw it a quarter of a mile away. Roads were scoured away. Deep ground scouring occurred. It dug up red soil and plastered it against completely debarked trees, sandblasted it. I've never heard anything like that happen. So this was an F5. The fifth one of the outbreak. So now they're starting to clean up. Jasper had already had its tornado. The second supercell that was in between the Jasper and the main Tanner tornado, there was a second one in between that. Within that line, right at the Tennessee River, a second one touches down. A double whammy. These guys are going out there trying to do the cleanup effort. It's only been 30 minutes since the first one hit. A second one touches down and follows almost the same exact path as the first one. Runs parallel for 20 miles. And all the structures that the first one hit, the second one hit. One guy that was injured in the first one was taken to a church. The second one slammed into that church and killed him. Those communities in Limestone County were hit twice. But unlike the first one, this one crossed into Tennessee, did F4 damage in both states. Now this tornado's rating is disputed. It's been ranked F4, it's been ranked F5. Fujita has it ranked as an F4 in his database, but the National Weather Service has it rated as an F5, making both Tanner tornadoes F5 because, well, think about it. They go over the same path for 20 miles. The F5 damage is concentrated in Tanner. You can't differentiate the tornado paths even though it was within half a mile or a couple of blocks away. The tornado was about the same size, and it combined, the second one killed 22 people. So combined, they killed 50 people and injured about 400 or something like that. These towns had no tornado sirens, but they were able to see the tornado because the supercells had a high concentration of lightning. Now, 6 F5s have hit. It's about 9 o'clock, and a supercell thunderstorm has started to cross into Alabama. It has already produced large damaging straight line wind damage, large hail in Starkville, Mississippi. It's crossing into Alabama. And at 9:30, another tornado touches down in Lamar County. It touches down, heads straight beeline for Guin, Alabama. 23 lay dead. Every house that it touched was gone. This whole thing was a buzzsaw. The damage was so extreme that not only was the houses swept away, the foundation was ripped out of the ground, shattered, and broken away, swept away. It leveled an entire mile-wide swath of forest and was basically what they say the first tornado land scar to be viewed by satellite was able to be seen. This was one of the longest duration ones. Of course, the damage in Guin was rated F5, and it actually produced F5 damage for the majority of its path. So it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going. It's making a beeline for Huntsville. This thing is about 24 miles to the southeast of where the two Tanners struck 2 hours earlier. The thing's been on the ground for 100 miles. Everybody is being warned in Huntsville to take cover. Sirens are going off. They're tending to the injured there. They got a couple hundred people injured. And now they got this third tornado that is coming through, that is going to come through the metro area within 30 miles of it. Luckily, the tornado actually lifted just within a few miles of Redstone Arsenal, and we all know what that is. But within 5 minutes, the storm recycled, and it produced an F3 a high-end F3 that went through Redstone Arsenal and leveled the trailer village. Shockingly, nobody was killed in Huntsville. But the Guin tornado killed 23 people. In the aftermath, next day, we wake up, news everywhere. Ohio Valley, Mississippi Valley, Tennessee Valley, completely left in ruins. The meteorology community's going, what are we going to do now? They realized, something's got to be done. Like I mentioned before, Dr. Fujita, professor at the University of Chicago, Dr. Greg Forbes at the time, now Dr. Forbes, who studied under him, he and a research team for the next 3 months collected as much data, photographs, film. They learned so much about tornadoes in those 3 months than they had ever since we've been keeping track of these. It also outlined the faults that we had. We had crude radar that was way out of date. And by the end of the 70s, and along with that, warnings were not issued via computer. We didn't even have computers in the weather service stations. They relied on teletype machines, that involved ticker tape. The piece of paper tape broke, they had to start over again, and some warnings never got through. Of course, many areas lack tornado sirens. In the aftermath, all teletype machines were phased out and replaced with computers. Radar evolved into Doppler radar, which gave more clear indication of seeing how intense rain was and to pick out exactly what storms they should watch. Of course, the advent of tornado watch and warning was already into effect for basically a decade. And deaths, which numbered in the hundreds, were reduced to about 20 a year. Teletype machines were phased out. Old classic radar was phased out and replaced with computers. NEXRAD would eventually replace that in 1997 with a network of several radar, these, you know what they look like, these white domes, you know, that send out microwaves, radio waves to check out precipitation. It's an entire network. We got a network of 100 high polarized radars. And now you know why we have not had, many deaths now. We've come a long way in 40 years, but we still have a lot of work to do. We still don't know why they form. We know how they form. We don't know. We still don't know why. So now, in the aftermath, after the towns had rebuilt, Richard Nixon, who had visited Xenia, signed into the Red Cross Act to assist families of low incomes to receive federal aid for natural disasters. He said the damage in Xenia was just mind-blowing. Now, after, of course, the outbreak, they learned so much. Grants were issued for more research. Doppler radar was instituted, old military radar was phased out, teletype machines were gone and replaced with computers. Easier way to get the warning out. Radio wire, battery backup, and increased awareness. Plus the fact, in the aftermath, this outbreak actually debunked several myths. They can cross rivers and valleys. The tornado that hit Brandenburg crossed the Ohio River into Indiana. The two Tanners crossed the Tennessee River. The Cincinnati tornado crossed the Ohio River not once but twice. Mountains and valleys, forget about it. In the aftermath, 30 tornadoes were ranked 4 or 5. No other outbreak has seen that. But it doesn't have the highest ratio of violent tornadoes, 1 to whatever. That I will explain about a week from now, which was sort of a precursor to the 1974 super outbreak. And then later this month, wait till you hear what I have to say, because I witnessed it firsthand, saw it on television, and tracked it with Dr. Forbes. I never thought that I knew it was going to happen in my lifetime, but I never thought it would have happened again. You better watch out on the 27th. I will be posting more videos. And as a side note, this past March 20th and 25th marked the 67th anniversary of the first successful tornado warning. Back in 1948, Tinker Air Force Base had been hit by a tornado on the 20th. 5 days later, these pilots saw similar conditions. They saw a thunderstorm coming. Tinker Air Force Base located on the northeast side of Oklahoma City. They took the gamble, issued a tornado warning, and sure enough, one went right through the base. We've had tornado warnings now for the past almost 70 years. But April 3rd also seems to showcase, now that we're done with the 74 super outbreak, a couple of other F5 events have happened on April 3rd, or violent events. In 1999, an F4 slammed through Cincinnati, Ohio once again. While at the same time in Benton, Arkansas, another F4 went through. Yesterday, marked the 33rd anniversary of an F5 that went through Broken Bow, Oklahoma, in the southeast corner of the state. It destroyed a hotel, carried the sign, and deposited 30 miles away into Arkansas. The rating is disputed because the supposed house that it hit left carpet tacks. House was still swept away. Who cares? It's an F5. Also in 1956, it marks the 59th anniversary of the Hudsonville Grand Rapids F5. It was this very, very narrow tornado, but it was very, very intense, and is regarded as only one of 2 F5 tornadoes to strike the state of Michigan. That's all I have to say for now, but hey, just be thankful that today we have come a long way with technology, because back in 1974 we did not have weather wire. Some warnings never even got through, or warnings were not even issued until after the tornado was on the ground. All communication systems were completely jammed, had to be, taken out of service, and messages weren't getting through. Some of the messages that finally got through were after the tornado had already hit the town. But it was an outbreak that did change the weather community and the way we look at weather itself. Something similar happened that I will explain on April 27th, about 3.5 weeks from now. The next video I will make will regard basically a precursor that struck an area just not the southern half, but northern half of the super outbreak area that was hit just 9 years prior to that. And it will be you will be shocked at what happened. So stay tuned. Right now, I've got the Weather Channel on. Apparently there is a tornado warning right now for Trousdale County, Tennessee, I think, or something like that. And last night, as I mentioned, I was watching storms that had popped up, and I called them right away. Not the Weather Channel, but I had forecasted a tornado warned storm to go through Parsons and Independence, Kansas, into the Joplin area. I don't like to be right when it comes to this, but it's unbelievable. But I'm going to go into, meet Dr. Forbes and Carl Parker for tracking this outbreak. By the way, where did they say that tornado warning was?
Nashville.
Northeast of Nashville? Did they say Trousdale?
No.
What did they mention with Trousdale?
Nothing.
What does the supercell look like?
It's not a supercell.
It's not?
No.
Well, how did that storm, was it going through a cycle?
Nope.
Did it have a hook? The tornado warned storm?
No.
So it was a tornado that was on the leading edge of a squall line?
It turned out it wasn't a tornado. It had like a little, was trying to get going. It didn't get going.
It was a tornado that was trying to become one, but didn't become one.
Didn't become one.
Rum raisin. You like rum raisin?
You were talking a long time.
Well, try explaining the 1974 super outbreak. But right now you're on Fox, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other tornado warnings that have been issued? Or is it just like a severe threat?
Just
Straight line wind damage, the ratio bow echo event.
not even a bow echo.
It's just these lines of thunderstorms, one after the other, round 1, round 2, sort of like what we saw last night.
Not even. It's just a line of thunderstorms.
Line of storms, one after the other. But did they? I heard that they had a tornado reported before.
I think it was Doppler
Yeah,
radar
I heard in the
indicated.
kitchen. I heard Forbes say it was a radar. It was a tornado indicated by Doppler radar. That's
It wasn't.
it's a scary moment. I mean, 5 years ago, this coming April, 6 years ago, this coming April 10th will mark the anniversary of an EF4 that went through Murfreesboro, Tennessee, to the southeast.
Yeah, it just turned out that.
And I saw that entire touchdown.
I mean, they sounded the sirens in Nashville, but
which I'm really not surprised though, because in Valonia, where Seidel was in Little Rock, when I forecasted that tornado to hit northwest and north of Arkansas, Little Rock by 25 miles, and sure enough, Mayflower and Valonia got hit.
But
the sirens were going off in Little Rock.
It was just a thunderstorm.
But it was a severe thunderstorm, and actually the protocol is in a tornado watch, if a severe thunderstorm warning is issued, they have to sound the sirens, because there is a chance that within the next couple of minutes, it only takes a couple of minutes for one to turn tornadic and to start rotating.